Good morning. Thank you to everybody for joining us today. My name is Julie Dabrusin. I'm the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change and to the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging that we are on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. Particularly important when we're talking about what we're talking about today, when we're talking about SEPA, which we're going to get into. So let me start by saying something really important, which is all Canadians deserve a healthy environment. And we're here today to announce some critical next steps on creating a healthy environment for Canadians through the implementation of the Bill S5 updates to the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. That's what I'm referring to when I say SEPA. You recall that last year we updated SEPA to make sure that our environmental legislation keeps pace with the science. We updated SEPA so that Canadians can be assured that their government is protecting them from harmful substances, like new kinds of chemicals that are being used in day-to-day products. And we updated SEPA because we know that sadly across Canada, there are certain communities that still bear the brunt of pollution. Marginalized communities, Indigenous peoples, Canadians with lower incomes, and susceptible populations such as pregnant women and nursing mothers. Updating SEPA ensured that environmental protection decisions offer a level of justice to these communities and ensures that their voices are heard in the halls of power. This year, we saw a perfect and I will say terrible example of these injustices with a petrochemical plant in Sarnia. The neighboring Amijanon First Nation faced unacceptable levels of exposures to harmful chemicals. In this case, it was benzene. Nobody in Canada should face that. It's why the updated SEPA, for the first time in Canada, specifically recognizes the right to a healthy environment under the Act. That's why today, we have a very exciting announcement about steps we are taking to protect Canadians from harmful substances, parce que personne au Canada ne devrait subir les conséquences injustes de la pollution. Les Canadiens et Canadiennes méritent d'avoir accès à un environnement sain. C'est pourquoi, en vertu de la loi canadienne sur la protection de l'environnement, nous avons reconnu le droit à un environnement sain. Notre gouvernement continue de renforcer ses efforts pour protéger les Canadiens et Canadiennes contre les impacts de substances nocives faisant partie de notre vie quotidienne, en faisant en sorte que nos lois évoluent en même rythme que la science. La création et l'utilisation des substances chimiques dans nos vies est un milieu en constante évolution. Et c'est pourquoi aujourd'hui, nous avons une annonce passionnante à faire concernant les efforts du gouvernement pour protéger les Canadiens et Canadiennes des substances nocives, notamment celles qui posent un risque sur notre santé et celles des écosystèmes. So I have some really important people behind me who are going to be speaking about this, and you're going to be hearing them in this order, also saying it so that everyone has a cue behind me. We will hear from Steven Guilbeault, Minister of Environment and Climate Change Canada, Dr. Ojistoh Horn, Board Member, Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, CAPE, and Adam van Koeverden, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Now, just before I hand it over to Minister Guilbeault, there's just one thing I wanted to highlight because it's something that has a particularly important place in my heart. The Government of Canada is working on a draft strategy to move us away from testing on vertebrate animals. And as someone who cares passionately about animal welfare, for me this is something that's a long time coming, and I'm really excited to be able to say that we have been coming a long way over the past decade for our government in terms of humane and thoughtful treatment of animals. We've been taking many steps, and this is one more step in that right direction. So with this announcement, we're going to be developing, standardizing, and incorporating new approaches to hazard and risk assessment activities so that wherever possible, we can cut down on vertebrate animal testing. And as I mentioned, when you look at it, there's been a long list over the years of the actions that we've taken. We're talking about, captivity, ending captivity of cetaceans. We're talking about the importation of rhino horns and of elephant tusks. we're talking about taking action on dog fighting and animal fighting. There's so many steps that we've taken. This was one more, and I'm really excited. So I just wanted to highlight that before I pass it along. So without much further ado, I'll pass it over, and we'll go to Minister Guilbeault.
Merci beaucoup, Julie. Merci, Adam, mes collègues et amis. Merci beaucoup, Dr. Horn. Thank you so much for being here with us. CAPE is such an important organization and an important partner of the federal government. So as Julie said, everyone deserves to live in a healthy environment. The Canadian Environmental Protection Act is a core environmental law to fight pollution and protect the environment. It's the foundation of how our government protects Canadians and the environment from pollution. Protecting Canadians from harmful substances often involve making sure we are listening to action and science. We rely on scientists to tell us when Canadians face risk that they may not be able to see. As an example, when CEPA was amended in 1999, it was aimed at treating 23,000 chemical substances in commercial use in Canada. Today, up to 10 million new chemical compounds are produced every year. Our science must keep pace with global chemical market. L'an dernier, comme Julie l'a mentionné, nous avons modernisé la loi canadienne sur la protection de l'environnement dans l'objectif de renforcer nos mesures de protection de la santé des Canadiennes et des Canadiens et des écosystèmes. Et cette réforme est une première au Canada depuis l'adoption de la loi en 1999. En modernisant cette loi, nous avons aussi renforcé nos efforts pour que nos décisions soient fondées davantage sur les informations scientifiques les plus à jour. Mais plus particulièrement, nous avons décidé de prioriser la protection des groupes et communautés les plus vulnérables aux effets néfastes de l'exposition aux substances toxiques, là où cette exposition est la plus élevée. Julie a nommé plusieurs de ces populations vulnérables. Aujourd'hui, nous continuons nos efforts de mise en œuvre des nouvelles initiatives adoptées lorsque nous avons modernisé la loi canadienne sur la protection de l'environnement. Nous allons continuer de protéger l'environnement et la santé des Canadiens et Canadiennes. Notre gouvernement annonce la tenue des consultations sur les publications suivantes. Le plan de gestion des produits chimiques, l'approche proposée pour la liste de surveillance des substances qui pourraient représenter un danger et qui nécessitent une évaluation, l'ébauche d'un cadre de mise en œuvre d'un droit à un environnement sain en vertu de la Loi canadienne sur la protection de l'environnement et l'ébauche sur la stratégie pour l'interdiction des essais de produits cosmétiques sur les animaux. Ces mesures montrent des pas concrets de notre gouvernement pour protéger la population contre des substances potentiellement dangereuses. Ces mesures suivent notre publication récente de l'ébauche du rapport actualisé pour protéger l'environnement et les communautés en s'attaquant aux substances chimiques persistantes. Ces produits sont une grande catégorie de substances utilisées dans un large éventail de produits de tous les jours, comme les appareils électroniques, les emballages alimentaires, les produits cosmétiques. Actuellement, sur la base des données scientifiques, notre rapport propose de conclure que presque toute la classe de ces substances chimiques éternelles pourrait avoir un effet néfaste sur la santé humaine et l'environnement. C'est la première fois dans l'histoire du pays que nous envisageons de réglementer une classe entière de produits chimiques. Et c'est pour cela que nous agissons. Today, we're moving forward on implementing new initiatives under the modernized Canadian Environmental Protection Act to strengthen the implementation of the Act and protect the environment of Canadians. Our government is officially setting in motion through consultations the proposed plan of priorities for chemical management activities, the proposed watch list approach to communicating substances of potential concern, the draft implementation framework on the right to a healthy environment, and a draft strategy to replace, reduce, or refine vertebrate animal testing. This announcement is about putting the health of Canadians first. It's about prioritizing disproportionately impacted groups. To give you an example, we've outlined dozens of priority chemicals to study. These include certain chemicals that are added to plastic with health studies show may be carcinogenic or have appeared in blood samples. Scientists are also going to be digging into certain chemicals used in flame retardants, which may elevate human risk impacts. This is something that firefighters are asking for. With today's announcement, we're strengthening the process to ensure greater feedback from external academic experts, the public, and Indigenous experts on research priorities. And this announcement follows major steps we are taking to better regulate forever chemicals. These are used in a wide range of everyday products, including food packaging, drugs, cosmetics, non-stick cookware, vehicles, and electronics. But we are finding that they are very persistent and accumulate in our air, waters, soils, and waste. This is the first time in the history of the country that we're looking at regulating an entire class of chemical instead of just individual molecules. Canadians want to know that their government is taking action against pollution. We must ensure the health of all communities. I think back to earlier this year when I met with a Black community in Shelburne, Nova Scotia, that was historically impacted by pollution and unfortunately still is today. For 75 years, there was a landfill that burned trash, sending noxious fumes into the community, putting their health at risk. That should not happen in Canada. Environmental protection should not depend on who you are or where you live. There should be no exception to that. Merci. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ojistoh Horn. I'm Ganyahaga, or Mohawk, from the communities of Akwesasne and Kahnawake. I'm also on the board of directors for the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. I've spent 16 years working as a family physician, taking care of my people through all stages of the life cycle. The intersection of the collective experience, voice, and health of women, Indigenous people, and the environment are the focus of my work and extensive relationships across Canada. I've been asked to speak briefly today about the right to a healthy environment, a right now recognized under the updated Canadian Environmental Protection Act. All parts of creation have a right to exist and live out their instructions in a balanced way. As the people, we have the responsibility to steward the lands, waters, air, and ice, and maintain the great peace, the great balance, the great homeostasis. I speak to you now with the knowledge of the current triple crisis of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. In her attempts to bring herself back into balance amidst the Anthropocene epoch, our Mother the Earth is compensating in ways that are not predictable, with floods, droughts, wildfires causing chaos all over the world. This is the same chaos that we see as health practitioners in the minds and the bodies of the people we take care of. I see the effects of pollution as it overwhelms the natural checks and balances of our environments and our bodies. I know that unhealthy environments lead to poor health. In Akwesasne, we have anecdotally high rates of cancer, autoimmune disease, endocrine disorders, and mental health disequilibrium. That is why the new right to a healthy environment under the updated CEPA is so important. Linking the health of people to the health of the environment is an important milestone, but it's not enough just to have the right on the books. It's critically important that it's framed and implemented in a meaningful way. In Indigenous communities, we have long been dealing with environmental injustices, and the right to a healthy environment is now a glimmer of hope. Since the right was put in place, we've already seen action towards justice taken in Amanjuang First Nations. Acknowledging that we have a right to live in a healthy environment will create a shift in the culture of our society. It should strengthen accountability frameworks, close regulatory gaps such as those on Crown and Indigenous lands, and strengthen international and interprovincial agreements that protect the lands and the waters. While we at CAPE have not yet reviewed the draft framework, we hope that it includes the following: PFAS, or forever chemicals, including fluoropolymers, to be listed as a class, which I've heard has been done. That the Chemicals Management Plan, or CMP, priorities and its science approach uphold the principles of the right to a healthy environment, which we've heard. That Canada's action to toxic plastics, domestically and in the context of a global plastics treaty, will implement the right to a healthy environment. And the protection of Indigenous people with inherent rights, including the rights articulated in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, will ensure the inclusion of this right. For 30 years, working alongside dedicated staff, physicians, researchers, and other NGOs, CAPE has been advocating for healthy environments. We are providing support and allyship with the voices of those who have been disenfranchised and most affected by pollution. These include the voices of those from other continents who are affected by our economies, the land, the children, and those who are yet unborn. I would like to take this opportunity to invite everybody to visit the Indigenous communities that are near you and learn the full scope and the complexities of our issues, and to think in generational cycles of time. Finally, the principle of environmental justice and the rights-based approach under CEPA must be implemented with the full spirit and intention needed to deliver in previously neglected areas and other areas of environmental governance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Dr. Horn, for being here with us today. And I have to say, Dr. Horn, every time I've had the opportunity and the privilege to meet with the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment has been an informing privilege. So thank you for your work with them, and thank you for all the work that you do with your community, keeping people healthy and safe. I'd like to thank my friends and colleagues, Julie and Steven, this morning, and just say that 2 years ago, a lot of us parliamentarians pushed for this. We said that, we needed to see progress and updates for the Canadian Environmental Protection Act through the legislative process, and I'm really grateful that we're here today. We have been doing that hard work that's needed to follow up on that commitment, and today is evidence of that. Unfortunately, SEPA hadn't been substantially updated since it was first created, and we needed some major elements of modernization, and this is evidence of that as well. That's just one of the ways that our government is tangibly delivering for Canadians. Our government was elected on an ambitious platform to strengthen environmental protections, and throughout the last eight years, we've been working on ways through that big to-do list, and all of those are found within the Minister's mandate letter. This is one of the things that really separates us from the Conservative Party of Canada. Right now in the House of Commons, a Conservative MP from Saskatchewan has tabled a one-sentence bill to proliferate plastics pollution. I'm in the Environment Committee, and they call it the Bring Back the Plastic Bag Bill. It's absurd. It's not serious legislation, and every time we aim to take a few steps forward for environmental protection, it seems as though Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives want to take us 2 steps back. Dr. Horn referenced UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. These acts of the legislature are connected. I was on the Indigenous Northern Affairs Committee when we passed the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, and somehow the Conservatives voted against that too. But today we're talking about protecting Canadians from the harmful impacts of pollution. And we know that the Conservative Party of Canada's priority is, to ignore all of that when it comes to the environment and to let big polluters off the hook. It didn't take much to write that one-sentence bill on plastics, but we know that it was motivated by and from the plastic sector itself. It doesn't do anything to protect Canadians. Pierre Poilievre wants to give big oil and gas companies and petrochemical companies a free pass. He turns his back on the work of experts, of scientists, of doctors, of Indigenous rights, and chooses instead to listen to conspiracy theorists and promote disinformation. Just as Pierre Poilievre voted 400 times against any environmental measure in Parliament, the whole Conservative Party voted against modernizing SEPA, and these important steps we are announcing today. The Conservative caucus sounds more and more like a certain Conservative premier this week who gave credence to bogus conspiracy theories of chemtrails rather than listening to science. Premier Danielle Smith had an opportunity to call that out as bogus conspiracy theories. Instead, she leaned into it. We have a government that's taking real action on protecting Canadians and our environment at the same time, because indeed, we are all connected. We can do this in a way that's responsible and creates a level playing field for industry and consumers. And as a former Olympic athlete, personal health is immensely important to me, as it's important to everyone. I'm personally very excited about the degree to which the measures today respond to and offer transparency to the public. And I can't help but remember a day in the summer when a certain donut and coffee chain in Canada took an extraordinary effort to bring forward a plant-based lid as an innovative thing, just to try it. I've done a lot of garbage cleanups in my riding with Sustainable Milton, and the most persistent form of pollution, it's just garbage out in the community. It's lids from coffee cups. So a certain Conservative MP took it upon herself to say that they were going to boycott Tim Hortons until they got rid of those lids because they didn't like the way that they looked. That's absurd. And I remember that day I was actually on the water and saw quite a few plastic lids floating in 16 Mile Creek. So when I go back to my riding and when I go and paddle on the beautiful lakes and rivers in Ontario, I want people to know that we're standing up for not just those rights as individuals, but also the collective rights of our environment. And we're making sure that government is fulfilling our duty to protect them from pollution and making informed decisions based on science. I would like to now turn it over to the moderator to take some questions for the media, and I thank everybody for being here today. Thanks.
Minister Guilbeault, can I ask you a question about what's happening in Sarnia, in Armjamong First Nation? Your government has placed an interim order with regards to benzene emissions, but that community, Armjamong First Nation, is concerned about exposure to other emissions coming from other chemical facilities in Sarnia. What is your government's long-term plan to ensure the health and safety of that community beyond just this interim order order on this one plant?
So it should be noted that when I first met representative of the community in the spring, 3 weeks later, we issued the order. It's an historical first in Canada that such an order was issued so rapidly, and it was made possible because of the amended CEPA and the implementation that we're working on to right to a healthy environment. What's the long-term plan for the community? So we have between Environment and Climate Change and Health Canada, we are regularly monitoring the situation on the ground, working with the community to make sure that their health is protected. And the evacuation today, because of the work that the company has to do, is just one example of putting in place the precautionary principle. We're not sure that something may happen, but in case something does happen, we don't want the community to be faced with those levels of pollution. So we will continue to work with them hand in hand to monitor the situation and to intervene, again, if need be, regarding this company or other companies.
Mr. Guilbeault, I'd like to ask you about greenwashing. So, just to set the stage, a couple of years ago, Canada allowed oil sands companies to give this presentation at the Canada Pavilion at COP27, the Climate Summit. You said at the time you felt oil and gas lobbyists could have their voices heard just like everybody else. So since then, the government has passed these greenwashing provisions. Now the oil sands companies say they can't say what they want to say. So my question is, do you feel that their claims around carbon capture, eliminating, megatons by 2030, that the industry was making at the time, could they make those same claims now at this upcoming climate summit?
So the changes we brought forward to the Competition Act are fairly simple. I mean, to grossly reduce the complexity of the Competition Act, it basically says, as a company, if you put forward a product and you give certain features to this product, you as a company, you as an entity, have the burden of proof. It's not up to government, it's not up to the public to be able to disprove what you're saying. You have to be able to prove that it does what you say it's doing. And we've amended it to publicity. So basically what we're telling companies, if you're doing publicity on environmental issues, you have to be able to back it with facts. Some companies decided to pull some of their campaigns, namely on carbon sequestration. You would have to ask them why they did that. There's been no complaints that have been filed against them with the Competition Act. So I'm not in a position to say, well, this is the situation or that's the situation. They decided to pull it themselves. But moving forward, we want to make sure that any company making claims about the environmental virtue of what they're doing or their products they have the ability to back it up.
What do you say to the companies who believe that they've been silenced by these rules?
Absolutely not. Canada is still a country where freedom of expression is maintained. But if again, as per the Competition Act, if we're just applying existing features of that act to publicity. There's nothing new to it. You shouldn't be able to claim something about a product as a company if it's not true.
Can I ask you a couple of other questions, 2 quick questions about another First Nations, Dene community, Fort Chipewyan in Alberta. They say that there was a 2017 report, so leaders in Fort Chipewyan say there was a 2017 federal government report about a dock in the community that found there was toxic contamination in that area. They say that their community was never informed about the findings in this report. Was the federal government aware about this toxic contamination, and if so, why did it not share those details with the community?
So I was in Fort Chipewyan just about a month and a half ago, perhaps, meeting with the community and the 3 nations there. You may remember that we announced something that they've been requesting for, fortunately, many years, which is a health study of the potential impacts of oil sands pollution on the community. It's actually something that they've been asking for 20 years. So we've decided to fund a study for at least 10 years in the community. I'm not aware of that specific instances in 2017. I'm happy to check back with the department and get back to you on that.
So the community did their own testing, they found elevated levels of arsenic and hydrocarbons. What will the federal government do now with this information? Will you remediate the site? That seems to be what the community is asking for today.
So which site are you referring to specifically? There.
So, the dock.
Oh, okay. It's about. Oh, right. It's about the dock.
Basically the shorelines of that community.
Yes, I have seen the dock, and we have started talking to concerned federal departments to see what action could be taken to remediate the situation there, namely Transport Canada and perhaps another federal department, which I can't remember right now, but DFO. Yes, thank you.
We will now take.
Oh, Adam would like to add something to that.
Just David, we've been talking about this a lot at Environment Committee, and we've had leaders from Fort Chip join us at committee a couple of times, and we've also had the CEO of Imperial Oil come, and the difference in opinion on, how higher levels of, I think it's naphthenic acid, I'm not a chemist, which is the main precursor for gallbladder cancer, which is extremely rare in general populations and extremely elevated in the Athabasca First Nation cohort. The CEO of Imperial Oil continues to claim that there's been absolutely no leakage. And, that is contrary to what the Alberta Energy Regulator has suggested, that a small amount of leakage is totally normal in their operations. So what we've seen is a complete abdication of responsibility from the CEO of Imperial Oil, who refuses to acknowledge that any of what they call process-affected water has reached the ecosystem, which is clearly true.
And if I may add on what Adam was adding on what I was saying, we've announced that we would be regulating naphthalic acid from the oil sands recently. And there's an ongoing investigation by the Enforcement Branch of Environment and Climate Change Canada regarding the Curl mine site leak.
We will now take questions on Zoom. If you have a question, please use the raise hand function. As usual, one question, one follow-up. Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions sur Zoom. S'il vous plaît, utilisez la fonction main levée, comme à l'habitude, une question et une question de suivi. Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Merci.
Just the right to healthy environment. This is what a major thing of this act is about. What tangibly changes? Are Canadians going to be able to sue for environmental damage and for things that are,
Canadians already have the ability to do that, and it already happens in many instances, whether it's a company, whether it's a municipality, provincial or federal government. I think I think one should look at the right to a healthy environment as this beacon we will be following to ensure that moving forward, when we approve new projects, when we approve new processes, new chemicals, that the rights of all Canadians are taken into consideration, but more specifically, those population that have traditionally been more impacted. So it means we will have to take special attention to go even further in our understanding of the potential impacts. You can do impact assessment for the general public, and the more specific impacts on marginalized communities or on Indigenous communities can get lost in the sea of a majority of Canadians. So by taking special attention to those populations that have or that are or have been subject to higher levels of pollution, being more impacted by pollutions, will force us to come up with better laws and better regulations.
But what if your government doesn't do this, or future government doesn't abide by the virtues of this act? What's the enforcement or accountability mechanism that kicks in?
So the part of the reason we're launching these consultations. So we have now the framework with the modified, the updated SEPA. The consultations will help us to determine how do we apply this and how do we provide tools to communities, to Canadians, to ensure that this happens. So I don't have the answer to that yet, and part of the consultations are to determine the application of this new right that we've created in Canada.
So what are the mechanisms you're weighing? Because I know you, I mean, yes, you want to hear from Canadians, but surely, like, your staff, your department must be weighing, okay, these are certain the tools.
I think it'd be premature for me, before we even start the consultation, to say, well, you know, this is what we want to do. The very purpose of the consultation is to hear from experts, from doctors, from scientists, from impacted communities on.
And you only have a couple more months to go, so like surely
This is the beginning of a process, David. It's not the end. Like modernizing SEPA was a major first step in order for us to be able to do that. Now we move into implementation, as we committed we would do. Thank you. Merci.